Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the incredibly fascinating evolution of corporate training. We're going to take a journey, tracing a pretty radical behavioral theory from the 1960s and see how it was meticulously transformed into a highly structured, almost rigid corporate business machine. If you've ever found yourself sitting through a long corporate training seminar wondering how on earth all that material was designed, pitched, and finally approved, you are going to find this absolutely revealing. So, let's get into it.
Looking at our roadmap for today, we've got 6 main stops. 1. A revolution in training. 2. The behavioral learning model. 3. Programs over teaching machines. 4. Pitching the training project. 5. The developmental phase matrix. And finally, 6. What truly drives training.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, A Revolution in Training, the 1963 Breakthrough.
Picture this. It's 1963. The standard, accepted way to teach absolutely anything is to just put an instructor in front of a chalkboard and have them talk at you. But at a University of Michigan workshop, researchers started reporting some seriously jaw-dropping results using a completely different approach. We're talking about department store cashiers slashing their training times by a whole third, all without a single instructor in the room. 200 library assistants, many of whom were foreign-born students, mastering this complex filing system in just 1 hour with 0 lectures. And maybe the craziest one, space agency recruits absorbing the technical contents of a massive, heavy, 2-pound manual of complex missile data in complete and total silence. No way, right?
Now, you'd probably think with mind-blowing results like that, every company on the planet would be overhauling their training departments overnight. But here's the kicker. A survey at the time showed that less than 4% of firms were actually using this revolutionary method. It's a pretty striking reminder that having the absolute best academic data doesn't always guarantee immediate corporate adoption. There was a massive disconnect here between academic proof and business reality.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the behavioral learning model, and how it shapes behavior.
So what exactly was this highly effective but underutilized method? It was called programmed learning, and it represented a massive paradigm shift. It completely stops looking at training as simply sharing information or lecturing to an audience. Instead, it defines learning strictly as a measurable change in behavior. Think of it almost like a literal engineering problem. You determine exactly where the student is starting, and you psychologically shape them step by step until they consistently perform the exact task you need them to do. In the industry, they actually called this the terminal behavior.
Educational pioneer Geary Rummler, who is right there at the forefront of this at the University of Michigan, broke this shaping process down into 4 practical, completely non-negotiable steps. First, you have to strictly control the learning environment. Second, progress gradually. You absolutely cannot jump to the hardest concepts first. Third, require the training to actively respond. They can't just passively sit there and let the information wash over them. And fourth, provide immediate confirmation. You have to tell them right then and there if they are right or wrong. It creates this incredibly tight feedback loop that literally forces the brain to quickly adapt.
Moving right along, let's clear up a huge misconception in Section 3. Programs over teaching machines, the true engine.
Human nature being what it is, people in the 1960s became completely obsessed with buying shiny new hardware. Companies were rushing out to buy these $5,000 electronic teaching devices, totally convinced that the technology itself would solve all their training problems. But here's the reality check. An expensive machine is really just a giant, heavy paperweight if it doesn't contain a psychologically sound learning program inside it. Without that strict behavioral shaping we just talked about, that brand new electronic device is literally just an incredibly expensive automatic page turner.
The absolute crucial takeaway here is summed up perfectly by Rummler in this quote from 1963. The big shift with programmed learning is that you must obsess over the learner's actual absorption of the material, not the instructor's delivery of it. The focus moves entirely off the teacher putting on a good performance and lands entirely on the student's measurable behavior change. It was a total game changer.
So, how do you actually sell this meticulous approach to a corporation? Let's dive into Section 4, Pitching the Training Project and the Business Reality.
Fast forward to the corporate reality of the 1980s. The academic purity of the 60s had to adapt significantly to survive in the corporate boardroom. We start seeing these behavioral ideas translated into intense formalized business frameworks, like proposal development guidelines from groups specializing in this method. The science of learning had to be entirely wrapped up in the language of corporate risk management and budgets. If you've ever had to draft a complex statement of work for a client or your boss, you are going to relate to this. Pitching a programmed learning project meant meticulously defining the business problem right up front. You had to carefully tailor the technical jargon so line management, who, let's be honest, often feel training is just a waste of time, wouldn't get bogged down. Plus, you had to explicitly list every single deliverable, whether it was a script, a manual, or a report, and clearly map out client obligations like sign-off turnaround times. It was all about creating a completely foolproof business contract for behavior change.
Once that proposal is signed, the real grind begins. That takes us to Section 5, the developmental phase matrix, or in other words, intense project management.
Behind the scenes, making this work required a multi-step pilot testing and revision process. You didn't just write a training manual and ship it off to the printer. No way! You had to carefully evaluate learning objectives, enabling objectives, and the delivery in a highly controlled pilot setting. Then, teams had to analyze those results, perform extensive design revisions, and check it all over again before any program was ever finalized for the company.
Taking a macro view of the whole operation, project managers relied on incredibly detailed matrices, tracking every single moving piece of the training project. Spanning across multiple departments, these tools charted tasks from 150 days out all the way down to the final rollout. It shows exactly how you take behavioral science and operationalize it on a strict, no-nonsense corporate timeline.
Breaking down those timelines, we see a totally rigid schedule. 150 days out, you're working with typewritten roughs. 90 days out, you are preparing proofs specifically for that crucial pilot test. This timeline steadily builds the pressure, ensuring that by time zero, the high-stakes day of the final rollout, that abstract educational theory we talked about earlier has been completely transformed into a tested, concrete reality through absolute, uncompromising project control. But what is the ultimate point of all this tracking and theory? Let's wrap things up with Section 6, what truly drives training, the ultimate goal.
The entire endgame of program learning boils down to a concept modeled perfectly in the early 80s. The subject matter goes into the enclosed bubble of the training environment, and the trainee goes through the training course. But the absolute most crucial moment of this entire process is when that trainee crosses the threshold, stepping out of that controlled environment and out into the real world.
And here's the absolute kicker. True evaluation doesn't happen at the end of the course with a simple multiple-choice test. Evaluation happens long after the trainee leaves, based entirely on their actual sustained performance out there in the real world. If their real-world behavior didn't actually change, well, the training failed. It doesn't matter how beautifully organized that project matrix looked on paper.
So having traced this whole journey, from an academic theory that slashed learning times all the way to a strict corporate project management machine, I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Does your organization just focus on putting on a good show, maybe buying fancy new teaching tech and delivering standard lectures, or do you truly focus on shaping real-world behavior? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really hope you take these insights into your next big project.